City of Eugene. And it also contains a table comparing lot requirements for small animals in several different cities. I can't compile the information, I don't think, any better than they did. However, I just wanted to read one small section. It was on page 8, and it says, to amend the code, Eugene Code Section 9.5250, Farm Animal Standards, would require a Type 5 process. Type 5 applications provide for a legislative review by the Planning Commission and City Council of changes to the Land Use Code. The process includes public notice. I'm probably reading things that everyone here knows 100 times more than I, so I apologize. But I'll just finish this 2 sentences here. The process includes public notice and a public hearing before the Planning Commission, which forwards a recommendation to the City Council. Then the City Council holds a public hearing before making a final decision. City of Eugene Planning Division staff estimated that the project would require 6 to 9 months to complete. And then it refers to element 5 for budget details. And so I understand that you don't have that on your work plan for 2011, but I would like to request that the Planning Commission perhaps create a working committee to review the plan and to move forward at least on the allowance.
That's a 3-minute.
Micro livestock. Thank you.
Thanks. Is anyone else here to speak? Apparently not. So next order of business is the Envision Eugene update.
Before we do that, actually,
Yes.
I'd like to invite Kurt Yeiter up to the table. He has a small piece that he'd like to talk to you about regarding the transplant update.
Okay.
Hi. It's actually related to Envision Eugene. As you may recall, parallel process that will more publicly merge with Envision Eugene is the update of our Eugene Comprehensive Transportation Plan. We've been working fairly quietly, but coordinating with the planning staff and moving forward with LCOG and our other regional partners, updating the transportation model, forming a department advisory committee for the transportation system plan. And one of our first tasks with the department advisory committee was updating them on how we use, as a city, how we use policies and what policies already exist in transplant. We gave to them a memo from the Metropolitan Planning Organization that they had sent to the local organization saying, these are emerging issues we wish you'd pay attention to. So we had that document also. And we created an online survey for the advisory committee where they could go through policy by policy and say whether they thought the policy was great as is, whether it should be updated, and or whether in this day and age it could be dropped. And then there's room for comment on all those. So we're collecting that from our advisory committee. We would also love to have the Planning Commission take the same survey online. We'd like to merge your sense on the validity of the policies or what new policies we should be pursuing, merge that in with our process at the early date. So if that's agreeable to the Planning Commission, I'd like to send you all an email that has a link to the online survey and the other background information I just described.
Absolutely.
I'm saying nods. This is great.
I think I've seen everybody nod yes.
Okay.
John?
Well, I have to ask this nagging question. Is this a land use process?
Eventually, there will be a...
Plan is not a land use process? I would think it would be. Hence my question, are you involving citizen involvement?
Yes.
Then it seems to me there should be a citizen involvement plan brought to the Planning Commission for approval.
It has been.
It has
been approved.
Okay,
It's been a number of months.
Okay, I've just forgotten.
And that's the formation of the Department Advisory Committee, and there's an online survey, and I'll some more information about
Forgive
that
me
also.
for
It was,
forgetting.
Well, you might
all
not
per
have
that
been
plan.
here. Yeah, again.
Yeah.
We'll use that excuse.
Actually, I mean, it's a question more than anything, Kurt. I didn't think that the transportation system plan is a land use plan. I thought and the modifications related to our land use actions. I thought that was a finding that happened earlier version of transplan. Can you correct me or affirm
So
that?
say again that it's not,
I didn't
but
believe
that
that
the update would be?
A transportation system plan is not a land use plan per se. I mean, we're doing robust citizen involvement regardless of what type of, how it falls in, but I was not under the impression it was a land use plan, so that's obviously something that we could clarify.
We've been proceeding as if it would be adopted soon or as a component of a comprehensive plan. And following our current
It has already
guidelines for
happened.
transplant, it goes through that same process.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Kurt?
Yep, and I hope to be back someday soon with a more thorough update on our process.
Do you have a timeline established?
Yeah, it's broad, and it's dependent on the Envision Eugene process also for getting through. But generally, the update of the transportation plan will come in two phases. The current phase will last through this calendar year, maybe not quite as long, and it will end with the identification of a series of actions and projects that can be taken to implement, I guess would be the right word, the land use plan that comes out of Envision Eugene. So currently we're updating the model. We've been doing traffic counts, getting things ready, getting the advisory committee will be looking at options on different strategies for how people and goods will move in the future, what standards we ought to be applying. We'll be merging in this, I see you've got kind of the grand merging.
Yeah.
An old timeline. The pedestrian bicycle master plan that's underway. There's LTDs doing a long-range strategic plan. Many other planning efforts will be merged in. The second phase is the more technical analysis and fine-tuning of the strategies and the projects. So there may be bus rapid transit type projects, getting costs, priorities, description of those, bicycle, pedestrian improvements, specific street improvements, all that will be described in the second phase.
But what you talked about being done, the first phase by the end of 2011, is still this arrow feeding into the bigger
Yes.
picture?
Yes.
Oh, very good. Very good. I like it. I like it when a plan comes together.
That's why we have the plans. That's why we have those arrows with the time. Still trying to adhere to that.
Keeper of the arrow sheet.
Yes, I'm impressed.
There's actually updated
you like a
timelines for what we call the transportation system plan on the web. Our site is eugeneTSP.org. And you'll notice we've also merged our web page with the Ped Bike Master Plan, with Springfield's TSP, with Lane Transit District. So there's a regional clearinghouse website of all the different projects that are occurring right now. So we can advertise events together. The information from the surveys is shared with all our partners. So it's a nice resource. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurt.
Thanks, Kurt.
So before I start the Envision Eugene, I just want to get a little housekeeping. There are some beverages on the back counter with the food if you're in need of something. I just realized none of you had beverages that didn't bring your own. So my apologies for not having those out earlier. So we're here to give you an Envision Eugene update. I want to just give you a little bit background of where we've been since the last time we met about this. So we all got together in this room with the City Council in a joint meeting on November 22nd. And at that meeting, the city manager discussed the framework that he's building within which the recommendation will be forwarded to council. He talked about pillars and strategies and tactics, and we'll flesh those out more over the next month or so. But so that was the basic framework, and we also heard from a number of community resource group members who joined us in the circle and talked about their experience working through this process. Since then, we've had 2 additional city council meetings. We attached the agenda information summaries for you in your packet today. In those work sessions, we addressed the triple bottom line, some of the triple bottom line issues of equity, environment, excuse me, the social equity and economic prosperity. This coming week, on Wednesday, we have a council work session on environmental stewardship. So we'll be sort of rounding out that fairly introductory or basic discussion of how those triple bottom line principles transect with the Envision Eugene project. But important to do that and set that framework because it really does help frame the decision process for this project that the council will be using and has been and will continue to use. So we're going to continue framing this. We're going to be undertaking a triple bottom line analysis of the recommendation on February 12th. It's a Saturday. The Planning Commission will be invited to participate in that along with members of Sustainability Commission, Human Rights Commission, staff, and some other folks who are going to help us with that tool. Then following that analysis, the Sustainability Commission at their February 16th meeting will review those notes that come out of that workshop. A summary of those discussions will get forwarded to the City Council for part of their decision-making work sessions in late February. So that's sort of kind of where we've been, and just really the triple bottom line is sort of the interior framework, but then John has really built this framework of looking at, and I'll go into details in a minute about what the 7 pillars are, and then how he starts to build the strategies and tactics for the plan that we're putting together.
Lisa, you said something about Saturday, February 12th?
Yes.
That's not on this?
It's not on there.
It's not on there yet.
And I'm not sure that we'll need the entire commission to participate in there, but we might ask for volunteers
A couple of members.
from the
What
Planning
is it?
Commission.
What is that? What is happening that day?
It would be a several-hour workshop to use the triple bottom line tool. It's an evaluation tool that we use on projects to kind of understand bring up certain issues that we might not otherwise be considered. And so a group will be kind of applying that tool to the recommendations, and then that work will be forwarded to the Sustainability Commission at their following meeting on the 16th.
And it's worth noting that the triple bottom line analysis is really a framework that the city is building into all decisions that we make. It's not strictly for land use decisions or things that are obviously more pertaining towards sustainability type issues, but all plans and processes we're looking at using the triple bottom line as an analysis tool. So Carolyn's going to talk a little bit more about council updates.
Yeah. So I just wanted to provide you with an overview of some of what we talked about with the council in their 2 work sessions, the first one on economic prosperity and the second one on social equity. Basically, the purpose of these work sessions has been to raise the issues to the consciousness. It's not necessarily to figure out how we're going to address all these issues, but talk about the problems and why it's important that we address these problems, and then begin to look at where the nexus is with Envision Eugene. So, for example, in our work session on economic prosperity, we spent a lot of time talking about the current economic status in our community. And one of the most kind of striking statistics that came out of that discussion for me was the fact that Eugene's average income, Lane County's average income is 16% lower than the Oregon state average. And the Oregon state average is actually lower than the rest of the nation. So we definitely do have a lag in wages compared to the rest of the country and significantly the state. And what are the implications of that? It translates into day-to-day challenges for members of our community who are having a hard time paying their bills. We saw eWeb has seen that households who are reporting problems affording utilities increased from 9% to 20% in just the recent years. Additionally, 60% of school children in the Bethel School District and 40% of children in the Fort J School District are eligible for free or reduced lunches. So there are some implications of, I think, that wage discrepancy that are important to acknowledge. So what does that mean for Envision Eugene? It means that we need to make sure that we are addressing economic development, that we have an adequate land supply for whatever our economic portfolio will be in the future. And that isn't just kind of acres of land, but that we have the right types of land, they're in the right sizes, configurations, in the right locations. And so we really need to be mindful of that. We'll talk about maybe what some of those recommendations might be a little bit later, but there is significant work going on with our community resource group and actually a couple different subcommittees that are looking at that specific issue. Regarding social equity, that was the next work session that we had with Council. A lot of those problems that are related to economic prosperity actually kind of manifest themselves in the social equity conversation. And so specifically, we're seeing issues around housing affordability, around access to jobs and services and education and recreation. And I'll explain a little bit more about each of these. And then around neighborhood livability. So those were kind of the three topics we focused on related to social equity. Regarding housing affordability, it's very closely tied to the wage issue that I just mentioned before. So let's see, for an average family, the earnings have grown by 6.3% since 1970. During that same period of time, the median rent has gone up by 26%, and the median home price has gone up by 144%. So you can see that the cost of housing is far outpacing our increase in wages in the community. And what does that mean? That means that there are more people in this community who have what we're calling a cost burden for housing. That means that they have to apply so much of their income to housing that it is difficult for them to afford some of the other services and food and things like that they may need.
I believe the threshold for that is 30%. If you spend more than 30% of your income on housing, then you're defined as cost burdened.
Access, do you have a question?
I was just pointing out to me where in the AIS that information can be found.
Confirming the director's assumption.
Always good to do. Regarding access, there is certainly an issue with affordability of services, so how many people can afford the, say, health care that they need. But there's another way that we look at access in this community, too, and that's the ability to get to where people need to go. In our conversations that we've had, remember, we've done a fair amount of listening in our community. We've talked to a number of groups that provide affordable housing, folks that live in affordable housing, and we asked them what some of the challenges that they face are. And at the top of their list is some of the reductions in transit services and the ability for them to be able to get to where they need to go without a car. And so having access to transit and bicycle and pedestrian facilities is just very important. And then, of course, the availability of healthy food like grocery stores and parks and open space throughout the community is another thing that we need to make sure that we're looking at to make sure those services are kind of distributed in an equitable manner. And finally, we looked at livability, and that is kind of an overarching question of how do all of these decisions that we make affect our quality of life in our neighborhoods. And so I don't know if we have forwarded it to you yet, but I should if we haven't. There was a letter that was signed by a group of neighborhood leaders. I know it went to the community resource group that talked about really wanting to protect, repair, and enhance the livability of neighborhoods, and posing ways to do that by furthering our work with infill compatibility standards and with opportunity siting. So I'll make a note to forward that letter to you because I think you should have it. But those are good ways that we can look at doing that. We also, as far as kind of looking at the nexus of Envision Eugene and these social equity issues, we need to look at what are our strategies to facilitate more affordable housing in this community. And not just the subsidized affordable housing, but housing that is affordable to the whole range of income levels. So where are the gaps and what can we do to incentivize more options? So we'll be looking at that. We'll be looking at some of the transportation and land use issues. And then again, like I said, what the impacts of these decisions are on our quality of life in our neighborhoods. So then coming up on Wednesday, we have our work session on environmental stewardship. And I did forward you a link to the AIS. And if you haven't gotten a chance to look at that yet, the main topics that we're looking at there relate to greenhouse gas emissions and air quality. We're looking at preservation of working landscapes, including farms and forest lands, preservation of critical habitats, water quality, and then the availability of parks and open space throughout the community. So we'll be touching more on those issues on Wednesday and talking about the nexus with Envision Eugene.
Yeah, I had a hard time opening that. Did any
Oh,
of you
really?
experience the same?
I couldn't open it either.
You couldn't open it. I'll do something about that.
Okay.
So I just wanted to kind of give you a general introduction to those topics that we discussed so you have an understanding of some of the issues and where council may be with them. And I think Lisa is now going to bring us up to date on where we are with the community resource group.
I am, and then we're also going to talk about public outreach and next steps, but this is meant to be sort of a open conversational dialogue more than a formal presentation, so please do stop us or jump in if there's points that you want to talk about as we go.
I just had a question about the housing affordability statistic. Not challenging the conclusion you reached, but I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around the idea that average family income has only gone up 6.3% in 40 years.
Since
here.
1970.
If that's really the statistic.
That is really a statistic. And Eugene is actually, I mean, I don't know that we're totally unique. There's certainly other communities that are struggling, but Eugene doesn't have a very strong employment base compared to other cities. We have the university, but there's just a big lag and a gap in
Let me go to the other statistic, and that is median home price being up 144% in 40 years. Once again, I guess I question the accuracy of these. I don't question the conclusion, but these seem off to me.
They're staggering, aren't they?
Yeah.
I just checked with Jason. He said, we can double check them. They might be.
I'd ask that you double check this
Okay.
because it doesn't look right.
Other questions or discussion points before we move on to?
I just want to make a comment. It doesn't surprise me a bit. I mean, I just look at the number of homeless people and people who've lost their homes. I mean, I can see it.
Well, just as an example, the average home price in Eugene in 1970 was what? Was it 50,000?
It was probably 50 to 60,000, and now
what is the
it's
average
200.
home price today?
So
It's 150 or 120?
it's 200.
200. So that's more like a 300% increase versus 144.
Oh, you're thinking that seems low.
I'm not disagreeing with your conclusion. I'm just saying I think your stats are way off. Yeah, please do.
So I want to talk a little bit about the Community Resource Group, which has continued to meet with good regularity. We've been meeting with a sort of increasing frequency over the last few weeks as we're building towards this February deadline with the council to help them with the decision-making framework. We've met twice since the beginning of the year. We are meeting tomorrow, and then we're meeting again on February 1st, and those are the final meetings scheduled of the Community Resource Group. I actually wanted to invite the Planning Commission the full Planning Commission membership to attend either of those meetings or both of those meetings if you're interested. I know it's short notice, but if you're able to drop into any portion of it, I think it might be helpful as we move towards your dates to talk about this, including your joint meetings with council in the next 4 weeks or so.
Dates and times again?
Tomorrow from 9 to 4 at the Hilton, and February 1st, 9 to 4 at the Hilton. And there is parking available in the Hilton garage.
And that's the 12th floor.
Right, 12th floor Vista room, and we will be providing lunch. But if you do plan to come, it'd be good to give me a heads up, just because we try to keep a number. Yes? Okay?
I can probably do
I'm not sure I
first.
can.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
I'll be there.
So I mentioned earlier that at the November 22nd joint meeting that you held with the City Council, John presented sort of this pillar framework. The CRG also had a presentation from John on what are now 7 pillars, and I just wanted to go over those with you in very high level. Pillar number 1, support a sustainable family wage economy, provide affordable housing for all income levels, plan for climate and energy uncertainty, promote compact urban development and efficient transportation, protect, repair, and enhance neighborhood livability, protect and restore natural resources, and provide for adaptable and flexible implementation. And the way those pillars have sort of come together, and the way that what they're meant to embody is really all the range of issues that have come before the community in this process. So those that have been considered by the Community Resource Group, by the council, by the many neighborhood associations, and throughout our public outreach process, all the information that we've been gathering and hearing from people on issues of importance that need to be addressed in our plan are really meant to be embodied by those 7 pillars. So as you go through, as we start to build the strategies and the tactics for this plan, and you look at them, the question is this issue captured under one of the 7 pillars? And so that's sort of how we're trying to provide this framework going forward. So that was something that the community group worked on. I think it was the meeting before last. We also, and it should be noted that while there's a sort of active group of about 45 people, but it's a rotating membership, so there's still probably close to 60 people, I think, participating in the community resource group. We also have some subgroups that have been meeting to discuss some specific issues. One is an economic development pillar or issue area. One is mixed-use centers, and then housing mix. So those 3 areas. And then there's a sort of a 4th subcommittee I'll talk a little bit more about, which is a technical resource group, which is meant to be a group that sort of looks at and verifies sort of data and assumptions that are being fed into this process for the plan. And looking at commercial land, and so as we've gone, there have been small groups discussing these issues. They've been brought back to the large group. We're continuing to do that process of having the small groups come back and report to the large group. But we're starting to pull out some sort of conclusions and things we think that there's general agreement on that are going to start to build the framework of John's recommendations to council. So we're concluding that for commercial lands, we will be able to meet our commercial land need within the existing urban growth boundary. So that's sort of an assumption that we're putting forward that we discussed at the last CRG meeting, that we are meeting that through vacant land and through redevelopment in core commercial areas, commercial corridors, and in the downtown area. For multifamily housing, and so we had one group, as I said, mentioned that's been working on housing mix, and so there's multifamily and single family. Single family, we haven't yet reached any conclusions, and we think it's going to take us a little bit more work to get there. But on the multifamily, we are concluding that we'll be meeting our multifamily land need on existing land, so within the urban growth boundary, that there would be no need to expand for multifamily. And that, again, is through redevelopment within core commercial centers, corridors in downtown, through compatible transition areas between sort of neighborhood areas and then more commercial areas that provide for a variety of housing types, through opportunity siting, and through the development of more clustered and attached housing types. Then Carolyn mentioned neighborhood livability in this letter that we received from a group of neighborhood leaders. Those issues have been discussed quite a bit throughout all of our conversations over the last 9 or so months. And really the focus there is on protecting, repairing, and enhancing neighborhood livability. And so we're concluding that this plan will not increase allowed densities or implement efficiency measures unless they are in accordance with the infill and compatibility standards. So that really there may be some sort of incidental additional density under the allowed densities currently, but that we won't be assigning sort of new higher densities to our core neighborhood areas, and that any efficiency measures will have to be compatible with the infill compatibility standards process. So really putting a very high priority on protecting and enhancing neighborhoods. Did you have a question on that, Lisa? No. Let's see. Is this still me? Yeah.
I think you can skip this.
Okay. So the Economic Development Group provided a report back to the full group last Thursday when we met, and you have, do we pass out that, or that, the handout?
We don't have that.
We don't have that yet. Okay, well, we will forward that material once we have it for you. There's also a housing mix group report, and Randy chaired that meeting or that process and then reported back. And so certainly if you have any further comments on how that goes, we can go around and do that. Up next, the mixed-use redevelopment group will be reporting back tomorrow. We're going to continue with economic development and then talk about sort of flexible and adaptable implementation. And there's been discussion around how do we make sure that whatever assumptions we make and whatever policies we make, we can sort of flexibly adapt to what actually happens, because so much of what we're doing is based on projections. And you know, we've heard many people say the only thing we know for sure is that these numbers will be wrong, or that we won't get this quite right, because whether it's we're talking about how much our economy grows, what our population looks like, what the market bears in terms of demand for single family versus mixed versus multifamily. There's a lot of unknowns. There's some trends that we can try to use to project and stay within a range, but we want to make sure that whatever plan we come up with, we're able to continue to adapt to sort of the actual conditions on the ground and the market conditions. And so we're going to introduce a little bit of that conversation tomorrow at the CRG as well. So thoughts, questions, or comments from our housing mix chair?
Well, I could make a lot of comment on it. You know, if it's appropriate, you know, John and I, and at times, and Rick's been involved in it, and I know there was some concern about the Planning Commission's involvement in all of this, and, you know, I would just say my observation of participating in not all, but most of these sessions, you know, the city manager wanted to set this up because he recognized the history of this community and the divisive nature between the pro-growth and the no-growth camps, and I think it's fair to say that while maybe those extreme ends of the spectrum aren't necessarily represented in the CRG, the people that are in the CRG do represent a broad range of perspectives on this whole thing. And I'm not hearing arguments or discussions about pro-growth and no-growth. Rather, I think everybody is heading down the same path. It's, you know, generally accepted. We want compact urban growth. We want higher density. We want to preserve our natural assets. We want to do affordable housing. We want, you know, the right kind of transportation. What the differences now are coming down to is how far we go and how fast we get there. And, you know, as a good example is this housing mix, in my opinion. I was on the small group, the CRG small group on the housing mix. And you'll recall several months ago, we got Eco Northwest report on the housing mix density issue. And you might recall that Eco Northwest was suggesting that a 55% single family, 45% multifamily mix was a reasonable percentage to look at going forward based on historic data, based on anticipated demographic changes, based on state and local goals regarding compact growth and affordable housing. And just, again, as an example of the people on the CRG, some wanting to move faster than others are, in this housing mix subgroup, we had some folks that were suggesting that perhaps a 40% single-family, 60% multifamily mix was the visionary endpoint where we should go. On the other end of the spectrum, we had people who were involved with, risking their money and meeting market demand in the housing arena, suggesting that no, maybe a 60% or higher single-family mix and 40% or less multifamily mix was appropriate. And so this thing spreads out, and that's where you have the push and the pull, is where do we land on that? What finally came out of the small group that was recommended to the larger CRG, which I don't think has been completely embraced, but to a certain extent, was that somewhere between 55% and 60% single family was probably the reasonable single family percentage factor to use as we go forward. The other side of that coin, though, is density. And while we've talked generally about how that density factor fits into the equation where you end up calculating how much land you actually need, that's yet to be discussed. And that's the strategies on, do we reduce the minimum lot size? Do we make that smaller? Do we put caps on maximum lot size? Do we try to implement density type of minimum density for single-family homes? All those strategies or tactics have yet to be discussed, and that's what's going to have a significant impact. But the point of it is I think the city manager and Bob Chadwick and Diane, for some of the criticism they've taken, has brought the discussion not pro-growth versus no growth, but how far and how fast do we get to the end point? And that's where the discussion in my mind is now. That's all I have to say.
John, do you have anything to add as a CRG member?
I think you're absolutely right in what you had to say. We've come a lot further with this group than with any other group I've seen in this community on trying to find common ground. On the other hand, I think that's partially because we're not going to work our way all the way to the end point. Our role is to be an advisor to city staff and John Reese as to where he wants to make a proposal, and therefore we don't have to have those fights over 55, 57, 59, 60%, which I think is a plus and a minus both. I think it is an appropriate role as long as the participants realize what that role is, and I think they do now. Some of them had a different perspective. I also think some people who started aren't there now for a myriad of reasons, some of whom are because they aren't making the decision in their minds, or because they don't see the value in engaging in advice rather than decision. And some are unhappy because the game's not being played the way they want to play it. But these are also busy people, and some are not being able to make it just because of their schedules. Having said all that, I still think it's a wonderful process.
And I guess I would just add that, I haven't so much observed that folks are sort of unhappy. I think the way you described it, Randy, it's not no and pro. It really is talking about increments along an issue continuum. And so people really are coming with their interest and trying to figure out how to push things forward. So there may be some points of disagreement still, or different sense of what the reality is of where we're going. So people have different perceptions, and there's values attached to that more than, it's not oppositional. So, I really do think that the work that we did early on has set us up to have this conversation now in a different way, which is our goal. And so it's pretty gratifying to see that that's actually playing out. It's still challenging, and we still have a ways to go. But I think it's working pretty well.
And Lisa and Jeff and Bill, to the extent you can, these last 2 days will kind of fast forward you from the session that we had as a planning commission with Chadwick, kind of through all these hours and days of sitting around in the circle and listening to one another. I think these last 2 days kind of start to gel it as far as it's going to be gelled as far as the CRG. So it would be worthwhile for you if you can even make one of the sessions just to get a sense for the dynamic and where the mindset is heading with it all. It would catch you up, I think.
Just an anecdotal piece that shows me how things have changed. We were discussing the housing mix percentage, and one person said, well, I'll be honest with you, I'm more concerned about the result than the number, so I'm going to support this number because I want that result. That's an honesty I would not have expected to see in this community in the past. So I think we've come a long way.
We'll see.
Just a comment on the percentage of mixed or multifamily versus single, and using current trends or in past trends. With the statistics I just heard, I kind of question using past trends. It seems like things are getting worse, and people are becoming poorer, and therefore, it seems to me like multifamily dwellings would probably be more affordable. So that's just, maybe not. They could probably be more expensive too. But it just seems to me like you can get more people in a smaller amount of space with the multi.
I'm going to ask Jason Dedrick to talk a little bit about that sort of housing mix and the work and what's gone into that, because it's a complex process.
Some of the earliest work was done as part of the ECLA process, which the foundation of ECLA was to try and see, or get a sense of where we've been as a community to try to inform where we might want to go. And so some of that involved looking at data over the past 30 years, and that data showed that our housing mix had stayed remarkably consistent for 30 years at about 60-61% single family. And so I think your point is a good one. When we look at our housing mix has stayed roughly the same, and yet we know that our affordability gap has been widening. And so I think that's when you start to be able to beg the question, so how do we want the future to be different than the past? And so, there have at times been criticism of the use of past data, and I think we should approach that data kind of with our eyes wide open, which are we use it to inform what we want to see differently about the future. And so that's, I think that's the real context for a lot of the ECLA data, such as what is our past or current housing mix, is what do we do with that data? And so I think that's part of the thinking that went into Echo Northwest's analysis of our housing mix, and the recommendation that perhaps 55% would be a good way to go. Certainly people have made arguments that you could slide further down that scale, but that gives you a little bit of the context for kind of some of the past data on housing mix. It's also worth noting that it takes a lot of inertia to change something like housing mix. When you consider our entire housing stock, if our entire housing stock is 60% single family, 40% multifamily, if you flipped that, I don't know what the quantitative part of this is, but you can imagine flipping that. If just for the next 10 years we built 40% single family, it would take a lot to pull our overall aggregate housing mix down. So it doesn't mean that what goes forward in the future shouldn't be different, but it takes a lot to change that overall housing mix just because of what we have currently built.
I guess the other thing that's important to me is this seventh pillar, provide for adaptable and flexible implementation. What I'm hearing is sort of a thought of every 5 years we would see, are we really doing what we've said we are going to do? And if not, why? And what do we need to change that? So, yeah, I understand the push-pull between trying to encourage a trend that seems to be there, but we're not sure it is, and not making the mistake of setting the goal so high that it's unachievable and you actually retard your ability to get there. So I think for me, number 7 is a critical pillar.
Thanks, Jason. Do you want to talk about outreach efforts?
Yes. So you did have a calendar in your packet on page 41. I just want to make sure that we point out all of the other kind of opportunities for comment and involvement as we approach the end of February. We are going to our boards and commissions beyond the Planning Commission. We're also talking with the Sustainability Commission. We've been to the Human Rights Commission. We have a Historic Review Board meeting scheduled actually for February 17th, which did not make it on the calendar, but we also have, as we talked about before, the triple bottom line analysis happening on February 12th, which also didn't make that calendar, if you just want to fill those in. We have 2 public open houses scheduled, one on February 3rd and one on February 10th. And Terry's not here.
She's right here.
I moved.
Right there. Thank you.
Musical chairs.
Terry, can you tell us where those are?
Sure. The one on the 3rd is at North Eugene High, off River Road, from 4 to 7 p.m. And the one on the 10th is at Roosevelt Junior High on East 24th in South Eugene, also from 4 to 7. And the thought is that they would repeat the same program and just give folks a different location on 2 different sides of town to attend.
South Eugene, you said?
Roosevelt Middle School in South
Roosevelt.
Eugene, yeah.
It's also important to note that we do plan on having the staff recommendation out before those public open houses. So we'll make that widely available on the internet and at the open houses, so people will be able to comment on the specific pillars, strategies, and tactics that we have at that time. And actually, we're hoping to have those early next week. So here we go.
What times again, Terry?
4 to 7 p.m.
We've also been asked to attend a few neighborhood meetings, and so we're available to attend neighborhood meetings as people request that. And then on the 22nd of February, there will be a public hearing before the City Council. And all this information, all the feedback that we get will then be kind of folded into a revised recommendation that goes before the council on the 28th. That is the plan. I feel like I missed a couple things in there. Well, specifically, we have a planning commission meeting on the 7th of February, and we will have the full proposal then. So that's an opportunity for us to kind of fully review everything that's in that proposal before our joint meeting with the City Council later that week on the 9th. And then we have an additional meeting with the City Council on the 16th to go over those.
And I just thought maybe it'd be good to have Terry fill in some of the details on some of the general outreach efforts that we've been making, because there are some pretty cool things we've been doing.
Thanks. Yeah, it feels like a pretty exciting time. There's a lot of stuff on the calendar leading up to this big milestone of releasing the city manager's draft proposal. And hand in hand with that, we're designing a feedback form to be distributed just as widely as the proposal itself, so that we can gather stuff in a hopefully consistent format. So it's not done being revised or designed yet, but we'll have an online survey form or a print survey form that we can have available for folks to take to their neighborhood meetings and fill out and turn in their input that way. And we'll compile that and get it all to you and the council. Also, of course, when we release this and want to get people's feedback on it, we need to make sure that they know it's available. So we have a pretty aggressive schedule of print ads and press releases and things like that. So you may hear about Envision Eugene or see us on the news, the local news. And then one other thing is that we've been doing some outreach videos in a couple parts of town. The first one's up on our website, and it was done out in the Bethel district of town. And Councilor Farr did a nice little introduction to it. So you can click on that on YouTube and see what folks out there had to say. The other 2 were in the Sheldon, Coburg Road kind of area, and Randy will be one of the stars in that video, so you can look for that one next. And then the final one was done out in River Road, Santa Clara, and we're still rounding up folks to do the introduction for that piece. If you're interested, John, we could talk to you.
This is my hood now.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, Lisa.
Yeah. So just in terms of next steps, where we're going, so Carolyn mentioned we have the February 7th Planning Commission meeting, then the February 9th. I guess you did all of these, didn't you?
I did.
So let me jump to post-February. I mentioned earlier the Technical Resource Group, which is a subcommittee of the Community Resource Group that's formed. And really their sort of mission is to be the data verifiers. So, as I said before, there's assumptions and data that are going into this work that we're doing, and it's an opportunity to have a group of people who really like rolling up their sleeves and getting into the weeds of the data to talk through some of those issues, many of which will be post-recommendation to council. I mean, they really aren't things that we have the time to get into right now, and really the better time is to go, once we sort of have the framework for the decision, to go into more detail to talk about. So there's a group of people who have already been meeting, but will sort of ramp up their meeting intensity in the next sort of month to 3 months, I would guess. And that's a group that's being chaired by two of our community resource group members, Sean Bowles and Sue Pritchard. And there's quite a few folks on that group. So I think we'll get a lot out of that. We will be beginning analysis on the strategies and tactics as directed by council following the February 28th work session rather. We'll have a better understanding for what, if any, implications there are for urban growth boundary expansions based on sort of as we look at some of the housing mix issues and industrial lands issues. And then we'll begin building the package that will be submitted to the state for their review. And so that really then starts to kick off the more formal process around establishing the urban growth boundary. And there's, which is the Metro Plan Amendment process, and it has its own public process, that quasi-judicial process that we start working on. And then we'll continue dialoguing with both the county and the state. And we've been meeting regularly with both. We've done a couple of updates to the Board of County Commissioners. We've not yet met with the new board, but we'll probably do that post-February, as well as Lane County Planning Commission. There may be opportunities for joint meetings in the future. We haven't really worked through all that. But that's just kind of how we see mapping out the next couple of months. We'll continue to be busy for a while. Anything you would add, Carolyn, to what I just said?
Well, something that the city manager has talked about with the community resource group is he does believe that we'll be bringing recommendations forward specific to commercial lands, multifamily lands, and industrial lands. He doesn't think that we will be there, that there will be more work to do on the single-family housing side of things. And so just wanted to let you know, we think that there's probably more work to do in that aspect post-February. And the work of the technical resource group that Lisa talked about will help us get to a number there. Mm-hmm. So just for clarity, we're not drawing a line on the map at the end of February. We're making decisions about strategies that will help us inform where that line will be in the future. But that really work is going to take place post-February.
So, where are we on this?
That's been a long time since I've seen this one.
Well, I'm just kind of curious, we're kind of slipping the process, but Lisa, you mentioned that at some point in time we're going to be packaging it up in quasi-judicial preparation for the DLC.
This is still good.
Is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
What she said.
Yeah, these vague arrows, they really come in handy. No, I do. I believe that we are still very much on that timeline, on that trajectory.
I like it when a plan comes together.
Yeah, I've heard that.
John?
So there is no formal process for the Planning Commission to review or make recommendation to council on this step. That comes later when we start getting into Metro Plan amendments, code changes, et cetera, that would be required from whatever comes out of this.
Pretty much. I mean, I think the way we've set this up with the community resource group, that group is informing the recommendation that basically John's bringing directly to council. But then that'll start to build this formal process that we then kick off. So we will be going through a planning commission review process of that, and an opportunity for the planning commission to make a recommendation to council on that.
I think we were also just interested in setting up, because this whole process has been different, kind of looking at a different way of doing things, and the joint meetings with the city council is an opportunity to do things differently and maybe in more of a conversational and having more of a dialogue.
And actually, having said that, I mean, it's not impossible or unlikely that we wouldn't continue to look at some ongoing opportunities for those joint meetings to happen, even within the formal process. We obviously have to stick within a formal protocol, but I believe there's some flexibility there. And it's sort of like, as we say that we want to do things differently, we need to continue looking for ways to do that. So,
And there's R3 involvement, I understand that.
there's what?
The involvement of the planning commissioners in the CRG.
Right. Yes, you've had a strong voice there.
So unusual.
Yeah.
But to follow up with John, what format are these two meetings with the city council going to take here in the near term?
You'll know about 3 days beforehand. It's very fluid. So I don't know that we've gotten that far. We really are working one day at a time. And so right now we're focused on tomorrow's community resource meeting, and then we've got the council meeting on Wednesday. And then we'll get together with John and brainstorm a particular format or goal of each of those meetings. Did you have something you were going to add to that?
I just think it's too soon to speculate on the actual format.
But I would suggest that since there is no place for us as a body to recommend, there's certainly value in individual commissioners either speaking up at those meetings or submitting written testimony to council.
As you had that opportunity the last time you met in a joint format, everybody had an opportunity to say something, and we'll certainly do at least that. I don't know yet whether we'll be sitting in the circle.
That's what he was getting at.
No. I assume we wouldn't be.
Other thoughts, reactions, questions?
I think my observation has been that, and I've lived here most of my life, and so I know some of the dynamics that we've had in our community over the years. And I think what I've observed through the process, even though I haven't actually been part of the CRG, has been that kind of bringing together of the factions, if you will, in our community, and at least getting us going the same direction. And it sounds like that's, I think, being accomplished. And I think even though we're maybe not getting into the details of whether we're 55% or 59% of those sorts of things, we can at least reach a consensus on some of the direction that we're headed. And I'm hoping and hopeful that that's going to play out in the way everything ends up with all of this. So I'm still going to remain an optimist on all of this and kind of see where it goes. But I'm hopeful. And I don't think we've ever had this type of dialogue that the CRG has brought in this community in my memory. And I think that's an accomplishment outside the whole UGB and Envision Eugene and all of that. If we can accomplish that, I think we've accomplished something.
I think we may be building on the results of the West Eugene Collaborative as well. I think that was another example of a different way of doing things in Eugene. Having said that, I do have a concern that the degree of knowledge and sophistication that both this body and the CRG has is not necessarily shared throughout the community. So you've heard me say this before. I think we need to be really careful when we get to that stage that we do have a way for the general public to effectively engage. And I'm sure you guys know how to do that.
We're working on it.
Randy?
This quite lengthy strategy idea list for various topics. This is just gleaned from the CRG meetings.
It's actually even broader than the CRG meetings. CRG plus all the other input we've had throughout the process. It's
And
really cataloging.
as well as some staff forwarded ideas as well.
It's not prioritized or filtered in any way. Yet.
Yet. Okay. When will it be, or
I think we're continuing
that
to
to be
pull from that.
decided after tomorrow?
Yeah, probably. That, yeah. Carol, do you have any, what are your thoughts on that?
We actually, those lists could be updated because we have already had conversations with the CRG that generated new ideas. So there are new things to add to that list. We've also kind of begun to prioritize some of the ideas that have risen to the top. And so it's really meant to be a catalog so that we make sure that we haven't left anything off the list. We haven't let a good idea slip away. And so we're making sure that kind of that list is a complete catalog of everything that we've heard. And then we'll be drawing from that for our staff recommendations for strategies and tactics.
I guess, might this be part of the discussion that we have with the city council? You haven't thought about
It won't be
that.
that broad. I think
It'll
it
be
will be
more whittled down.
It will be whittled down
Okay.
at that point.
So I do have a specific question, and I probably elicited it also in the CRG. Going back to the strategies for neighborhood livability, Strategy 1 says do not increase allowed densities unless they're in accordance with ICS. Strategy 3 says do opportunity siting. It seems to me that an opportunity siting project could result in increasing density within a neighborhood.
Yes.
Consistent with infill and compatibility standards,
So they aren't exclusive.
Nope.
Okay, just want
Yeah,
to make that
I
clear.
can see that fit. Again, knowing what I know about OS,
Right.
that should not be an issue.
But the
My
key is the
concern
consistency.
is that we don't go back to the same process we did with the growth management policies, where everybody picked their favorite policy to say all the others don't matter because of this one.
Well, I could see changing Strategy 1 to actually say, in accordance with the goals and recommendations of infill compatibility standards and opportunity siting. That would
That
probably
would
be
help.
more complete.
I just don't want one to preclude the others.
Right.
And I think the example that we have going on at 29th and Willamette, is that friendly area neighbors that are involved with
Yes.
that
Mm-hmm.
thing, with that process? That's, in my mind, the model of an OS process that's fitting in with this kind of objective.
Unfortunately, it's our only example, so we don't know how it'll play elsewhere.
Yeah, it's the first example, but that's, Patricia's the one that was the lead, she and Terry were the lead persons on the OS.
And it's very encouraging.
And Patricia's running that FAN 29th Willamette project, so that institutional memory is right there.
Good. I just don't want to get caught in the battles we had with
Yeah.
growth management policies again.
One of the things that's mentioned in here is form-based code. Now, Lydia's gone, but can you remind me where we are with developing the code to implement Walnut Station?
It's adapted. It's in effect.
It is.
Yeah, since July 1, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, August.
August, okay.
Okay.
Any nibbles yet?
Excuse me?
Any nibbles from developers yet?
There's a building under construction where the old Ballard Pub used to be that complies with the new form-based code.
Right.
Anything else?
Well, yeah, if we can keep going here, just
We have
We have
some
time.
time.
We talked about this at CRG quite a bit, the reference to core commercial centers, corridors in downtown. Do we have a definition of core commercial centers?
No, and I think that's something that will get fleshed out as we continue to develop that strategy.
Okay.
And there's, I mean, there has been a lot of, I won't say there's disagreement, there's been a lot of discussion about what that means and what the pros and cons are for how you define that. And I know we've heard from you on this as well, John, in terms of by defining certain areas, are you then excluding others? And there's certainly no intention of doing that.
Okay. Yeah, okay. And I see real important in here on multifamily housing strategy, too. It talks about create compatible transition areas, and that's something that's extremely important in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's key, core to that.
Yep.
Yep.
On the neighborhood livability strategies, down there, number 4, it talks about develop specific area plans and neighborhood plans. Are those the SNAPs?
No, I wouldn't say those are the snaps so much. John mentioned this at the end of the Community Resource Group meeting
Right.
on Thursday.
Yeah.
And I think, and to the areas he identified that would probably be maybe among the first that we would look at would be, for example, the South University neighborhood area, doing some kind of a specific area plan that would look at, I mean, it's not unlike, I mean, it's not specific to a form-based code, but it's not unlike how we did the Walnut Station plan. and then the other would be River Road, Santa Clara. So it might be a refinement plan in one case, might be more of a scaled-back specific area plan in another.
Are
Not the snaps.
Are
Snaps are-
snaps still something we're doing?
They are.
Or available?
Yes.
And
Yep.
ironically, River Road, Santa Clara has a SNAP specifically to engage, educate, and assess the
Refinement.
interests in those two communities. It could well lead to.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm just glad to hear that.
It's sort of a different order of magnitude, I think, the
Okay.
snaps. It's a different
Well,
level.
I was adding the acronyms together, and it came close to SNAP.
You're right, it does.
Yeah. At some point in time, as this progresses, I would like more information on lot size in Eugene, what like our, there are references in here to putting a limit on max lot size, and I would just like some idea of what has happened probably in that 2001 to 2008 period in terms of how many lots in excess of 13,500 were developed, some kind of sense in that regard. And also what the density is. Now, the Eco Northwest report talked about single-family density at 5.4, but there are references in here to like 3.2, and I'd like some better sense of what the single-family density really is in Eugene, maybe overall, as well as during that built period, 2001 to 2008. If we can get kind of data like that, I think that would be useful. If other people have other stuff, go ahead and
I'll
chime in.
jump in and kind of tag on to that too, Randy, as far as I was reading through some of the ideas at least, getting to density, I know we have our code density and we're not at our code density, and one of the ideas was to have increased density in established neighborhoods not considered as part of our growth patterns. And I know that was just an idea, but I think as we look at it, are we looking at it based on code density or based on actual density? Because I know those are two different things.
Yeah.
And
I think it's actual density.
it's actual. Okay, good.
Yeah, that's the kind of
Yeah.
discussion we really need to have as we look at the,
Because we can set up code density all
Yeah,
we want, and if it doesn't
absolutely.
happen, then
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter.
yep. So a robust discussion of the whole density thing, so that we, yep. What else here? Yeah, I think it's important. We talked about not impacting existing neighborhoods, and I just want to remind us of what happened. There's discussion in here on multifamily general comments about increasing the density within zones. And I just want to remind us what happened, I think it was Jefferson West Side, when that neighborhood many years ago agreed to go from R1 to R2 zoning based on certain density, and then the code changed and upped the density, and that's what caused all the problems, or many of the problems there. And I would just hope that we remember what happened there as we do any kind of code densification stuff, so that we don't flop that back onto existing areas where it creates the issues. I think with all that, we can solve the issue.
I think that was, as I was reading through at least a lot of the ideas in that, and I was kind of marking up my thoughts and comments on them, there were quite a few that I put careful.
Careful.
You know, I mean, I think it's a good idea, but you know, there can be those unintended consequences, and we need to be careful about just saying, "Oh, yeah, that's a really good idea," but then, oops.
And that's the other thing that I've observed in this movement that the CRG seems to be making. You know, there are those that are very visionary and looking way out to the future and you know, evaluating what they see as demographic trends and saying this is the endpoint we need to reach. the pullback, the anchor that's dragging are the folks that are actually putting their money on the line and trying to achieve those things. They're saying, the banks don't loan, and institutional barriers, this and that, and the market, and so that's kind of the interesting interplay that we're getting is the vision versus the implementation, and how fast that can all move forward.
There's one area we haven't really touched on today, at least I don't recall that we did, and that's the whole question of industrial lands. And there's several things that have come through the CRG that are kind of interesting to me. One was a statement much earlier that not only do we have to protect residential from industrial, we have to protect industrial from residential.
Yeah.
Those of you who were involved in the Delta Sand and Gravel process may remember that there was a problem where Delta wanted to move into an area that was now residential. And piece that they were on was farming, and neighbors weren't real happy about that, and it was because of the proximity. The Baxter issue is another one where you have an industrial use in the middle of what is now a residential area. So that was one thing. The other being that, as we've heard before, I think, there's technically a sufficient supply of industrial lands in our community, but it's fragmented and in pieces that are too small to really utilize for that purpose. So there has been a fair amount of discussion of, do we need more industrial, and if we did, where would it be? And that discussion has not been completed yet, but there have even been thoughts about, well, could we claim some industrial land in Goshen, even though it's not within the urban growth boundary? Could we say that's our next place to go to when that suffice as a need? It sounds like current law doesn't allow that, but we also have a legislature in session, so that whole discussion is still in play, and we haven't mentioned it today, so I just wanted to air it.
And the availability of larger lot sizes has become an issue as well in terms of, 50 acres?
50 to 100 acre parcels are what we're hearing, and perhaps more than one, perhaps 3 or so, because for something about the economics is developers want to look at more than one option to find the piece that's right for them. So just having one may not be sufficient.
Well, and if I could jump in, I think also, one industrial property does not suit all, and so it's really kind of understanding where they're located and what the specific needs are of that industry. It helps if you have, more than one property.
I think you have to be cautious, too, about assuming that land that you don't have yet you could make available in time, because in point of fact, when you're in discussion with potential employers, it's a competition normally to a degree, and if you can't come to the table with options that are current and viable, then you're really not there. And also caution about all the things you've talked about in terms of financing and so on. Holding things up is also true with future employers, and I guess I'd raise a caution around being too optimistic. I guess a be careful comment about brownfield. I think brownfield is an area where we say, oh yeah, we got lots of brownfield, but the costs associated with brownfield can be very high, and you're going to have a hard time doing those things in advance and trying to sell those as viable alternatives. So I think brownfield is good, but we talk about, well, the city could do this or the city could do that, and you start talking about, okay, who's going to bear the cost of restoring brownfield to something that's ready to roll?
Well, I think there's been some talk maybe of doing pilot where you have a brownfield redevelopment site, but in the case of all these, the conversation has been around having certified sites, so sites that are actually ready, where you've gone through and say there's no wetlands, there's no, master plan amendment required, or it's been done. So that's really very much the context for the conversation.
Yeah, early on in the CRG, we did have representatives from the state economic development department and a CH2M industrial siting specialist that talked specifically about having shovel-ready sites to go. And the idea of the state, you probably are aware of this, certify certain sites that are ready to go and they promote them. There's some disagreement as to really how important that certification is, but the fact that they're so-called shovel-ready is the thing that we don't have ready to go. And just this last meeting, at least one of our breakouts, talked in depth about the brownfield issue. And that was being promoted as, we ought to really look at that. And all of the issues about financing and getting governmental approvals and sign-offs and just kind of the stigma that's associated with, even if you have a letter of no further action required from DEQ, it's just a hard sell.
It is. And those are, having had some involvement in that kind of work, it's time-consuming, expensive work. And I guess, the alarm bell that I have going off is, and not to challenge any one of the statements here, but we're talking about taking commercial to residential to some degree. We're talking about taking industrial to commercial. And then when we get to the industrial, it's like, well, we need to have this, 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 and this, and I just have a fear that where we'll end up there.
Well, and if I could jump in, some of those industrial to commercial would be very small parcels or parcels that would be suited that more in sort of the light industrial where it's more around what the uses, I mean, not around the uses, more about what
I work in is going through that right now.
Yeah, so it's not that we would be taking ones away that might have been viable for aggregated larger sites.
But there also was an acknowledgement in our discussions that industrial is the most likely to be converted to something else, partially because industrial land on a per acre basis is less valuable than commercial and residential. And our history has been, well, that's industrial, we can change it too. And there was a concern that if we do indeed declare an area to be industrial, that we lock that in and just don't willy-nilly is not the right word, but
chop it up.
Protect it, yeah.
We protect it for the purpose for which, and again, that may take us back to the protect neighborhoods from industrial from neighborhoods.
Carolyn, Jeff and Lisa and Bill, there was a chart, was it in the industrial paper that you're going to forward to the Planning Commission that had a breakdown of the sizes of these lots? And a lot of them are, you wonder, they're not viable industrial sites anyway. So I think that chart's in there.
It is.
I would request we have a little bit of time for information from staff and council commissioners before we leave. Doesn't have to be right now, but
Any other comments, questions? Still have time.
I just want to give staff the credit they deserve for the amount of energy they have put into this. I have a little bit of concern about the fact that you haven't been with us lately, but I know where you've been, so thank you.
Not in Hawaii.
I would second that, underscore it too. I know Heather was real instrumental in helping us with the housing mix, and we even called in Beth Goodman, who actually did that report. And I would venture to say that had we had Beth at the table when we were discussing it, it would have been it was a very interesting conversation, probably about 5 hours worth with her in our small group. So that's the kind of depth that we were able to get into with her on that. So that was very valuable.
Well, and that's a good point just to make to the Planning Commission in terms of the public engagement. I mean, we've talked about the CRG, and while the CRG has met in hours and hours of meetings in the formal CRG, these small groups were meeting 10 and 12 hours on their own in between CRG meetings. So, I mean, I'm not sure I've seen this level of commitment for a process like this before, and it really is remarkable what folks are bringing from the community of their own time, some of whom are in the room. There we go. There's one back there.
Any other comments, or are we ready to close this
If
discussion?
this doesn't get it done, I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's, I guess, go on to items for commission and staff then.
You heard it. That's all we're working on right now.
We know. Randy?
I don't know how many months ago it was, but the Planning Commission took an action, or I guess we recommended to the City Council that certain approvals, plan approvals proposed by developers be extended because of the economic circumstances. And I don't know, just popped up in my mind for, just as a random thought, I'm wondering where we are with that. Are we running to the end of that period, and maybe should we consider perhaps extending that again? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do, and it was about last January that we did that, and then went to
Was it?
council sometime. Yeah, because it was part of a whole group of economic
Right.
development or prosperity strategies that we're putting together. So I can follow up on that and get back to you.
If it's appropriate, we probably ought to.
Lisa, did you have something?
Yeah, regarding public comment about the farm animal standards, is that something that could be a reality that we could put into our work calendar this year?
Yeah, and I guess what I would say, probably not in the short term, but what I would say is that's one of several strategies that's probably going to be considered as part of Envision Eugene.
Yeah.
That, I mean, what kinds of things can we do? And so that's come before, one element of that's already come before the council in terms of the chickens, and so I think it's part of that conversation. I think there's some expectation that a recommendation for a code amendment would go forward, so I believe that would be bundled with that.
Okay, great.
Goats and chickens was the topic.
Now, that's interesting. What's the minimum lot size to raise a goat?
To be determined.
Have a robust discussion about that, probably.
Sorry.
There's a rooster on my block.
Uh-oh.
That's not good.
No.
You should have been at the Good Earth Home Show. There was a rooster there the entire time.
Couldn't miss him.
Making his presence
I
known.
thought it was the same rooster as last year, but I was told that it wasn't.
Did you have something, Bill? No. John?
Well, going back to Jeannie Harden's presentation, could we get a copy of the Sustainability Commission's Food Security Report? At least I think that's what she called it. The other thing is she's not here now, and it would have been nice if we thought about having some time, should we desire, to respond to the public on things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
I happen to have her phone number. I'll call her and say that we
Thank you, John.
the conversation and
thanks.
that we've asked for the report. But it would be, I didn't know her, that probably wouldn't happen, and she
Well,
wouldn't
and I
know.
guess I would say cautiously that that hasn't been our standard because oftentimes it's not something we want to respond, just as the city council typically. With some exceptions, they will respond to certain items, but for the most part, it's thank you, and they take it, and then there may be a staff follow-up on something like that, but you could lose a large portion of your meeting in following up to items, most of which we wouldn't have the ready to discuss.
No, my suggestion is not that we have a fixed time for a response, but an opportunity should one desire.
Well, and that's at your discretion, I guess, at any point.
I just didn't feel the right time to raise my hand. Perhaps I should have.
Yeah, I wonder, do we have their contact information so that we could, maybe we can,
In this case, she didn't fill out a
She didn't
form.
fill out a form, so no, we don't. But it
Okay.
sounds like John can follow up with her.
yeah, maybe in the future, we might, mention or have something set up like that if people
Should have
want
asked
to.
for the form.
Want to leave their information, so in case we do discuss it at the end of the meeting, that we can contact them and let them know that we're talking about it.
Bill?
I do have a thought on the, what kind of came up in my mind as far as the animals and code amendments and that. As we go through Envision Eugene and this whole process, excuse me, after the February time where we're setting the strategies and that, and you were mentioning, Lisa, about the code amendments and those sorts of things. So after that stage, is that when we'll be getting into the things such as building setbacks on flag lots and those sorts of things that have maybe come out of the R1 team and all of that? So that's that next step during that portion after it goes to council? Is that,
Yeah, I mean,
am I understanding that right?
Right. I mean, I would think that there may be, there may be some, we haven't sort of set this out with any specificity, but there may be some items that are so clear that we need to move forward, that we could move forward with or without council action. They're just good ideas, staff-initiated kinds of things that we could move forward. There may be some of those that we might look at doing in the next many months, but I would say probably the majority of things would be following council action on that. So, but the R1 process, I mean, that's sort of
They're the most right of the recommendations from the ICS list.
And I'm guessing that those actually haven't been done because we've been doing all
Right.
this.
Right.
You know, I understand that, so.
John?
Quickly, just a couple of changes in my life. I'm now living in the River Road Community Organization, and I am not a city resident, I'm a county resident. I did check, and indeed, if you're in the urban growth boundary, you can still serve on a board or commission. Made sure before I put the offer out. The other one is, by the end of next month, I will be retired, so watch out.
Brace yourselves.
Congratulations.
Yes.
I thought of this the other day. Here we're almost February, and typically we've voted on officers back in October or thereabouts, and I know we're extending out to June.
Right.
So are we just rolling the officers in for an extended period?
Yeah, and I thought we discussed that at one of the
did
meetings,
we?
because we've gone from the October calendar to the July calendar, it makes sense to do that at
Okay.
that time.
Okay.
Because I know my term got extended with all that.
Pardon?
My term got extended with all that because I was
Right.
on the 1 year
Actually, all of ours did to some degree.
fill-in, yeah.
Right. Rick's did. Rick otherwise would have been off in October, so he's been extended. And we are beginning that board and commission recruitment process, just so you know, and if you know folks who might be interested. But we've been increasingly doing very broad, robust processes for citywide board and commission recruitment, and that process is officially getting kicked off, I think, this week or last week.
Anything else? Do I need to move to adjourn?
And you hit the gavel to stop the
Again, also, meeting is adjourned.
Great.
Are we done with ICS?